Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told out of Voice of Radio, and that voice has recovered just about enough now to mean that we can do a history video. We have made it through to Supreme Victors, the penultimate Platinum set, which I suppose also makes it the penultimate Diamond and Pearl set. We are getting towards the end of Gen 4, though we will have some remakes coming up, but we'll get to them in a moment. And I remember Supreme Victors as a phenomenal set that completely changed the game. And it was a phenomenal set, and it did completely change the game. But I think it's fair to say that it was more one card, really, than the entire set as a whole. Now, it was released in Japan on March 6, 2009, and it was released in English on the 19th of August, 2009. So, I think it would have to kind of wait till the next World Championships to really make its impact, though it absolutely would. And we were carrying on with the SP Pokemon here, but we had a new thing, two new things in fact. We had Pokemon C. Now, these were champion Pokemon that were owned by Cynthia, and I really love the attention to detail here, because there were 6 Pokemon C in Supreme Victors. Rayquaza, Garchomp, Milotic, Roserade, Altaria, and Togekiss. And what do those 6 Pokemon have in common? Yeah, it's literally Cynthia's team from Pokemon Platinum. So you buy the Pokemon Platinum set, and in there are Cynthia's Pokemon, and there are 6 Pokemon, and they match her team that she had in the video game. For someone like myself who plays the video games through for the story, etc., rather than just competitively, and is a huge TCG fan, I appreciate things like this. Now, we also did have Pokemon FB. These are Frontier Brain Pokemon, like Dragonite FB, more on that in a moment. And they did match quite nicely what the Frontier Brains had in the game. Though me and the Frontier Brain, we didn't get on brilliantly. I dabbled, but little more. Now, it did actually, this particular set, include the cards from the Garchomp vs Charizard SP deck kit over in Japan. And thank goodness it did, because that's what turned this set from into ooh. Also, how good would the next set have been if they'd have kept it till then? Moot point. Now, there were some really cool promos here, like they've done, well, pretty much once a year, where they have the entire line as promos for tournaments. So, Gibble was what you would get when you rocked up to a city championships. Gabite is what you would get at your state, province, or territory championships. And Garchomp was your national championships promo. Now, they did always need a 4th promo here, because as well as those 3 tiers, we also had regional championships, and they gave Garchomp C, so they kept him with a Garchomp line. I enjoyed these promos very much indeed. I wish they still did them. They were awesome. Your pre-release promo of note was Milotic, and your pre-release sleeves were also Garchomp. I think I forgot to mention in the previous video that the Rising Rivals pre-release sleeves were Rotom. I cannot remember if I mentioned that or not, so let me mention it now quickly. Now, not only were these Garchomp sleeves awesome, they are kind of legendary as being really hard-wearing sleeves. I don't know if it actually comes from anything, but these are the ones people are really after. These and the Lucario sleeves are the ones that people always talk about as more hard-wearing than the others. Is there any truth to it? Maybe. I suppose one day someone will do a test and then we'll know. Until then, who knows? Now, we were back to having lovely secret rares in this particular set. And again, we did have 2 different types. We had secret rare birds, those being Articuno, Moltres, and Zapdos. And I do appreciate the fact that one's looking left, one's looking right, and one's looking straight on. That is awesome. And then we had shiny versions of Milotic, Relicanth, and Yanma. Not particularly great or interesting cards, but shiny and lovely, and people love them. So we did have those secret rares that you could have a little bit of a play with. Now, the most expensive card in the set was Charizard G Level X, and that probably shouldn't surprise you. This will run you about $100 probably. Charizard G Level X is clearly it's not a particularly good card. Like so many Charizards before it, it's got big numbers printed on. 150 damage at the time was nuts. Wasn't a particularly playable card, but it's Charizard and it's shiny and it's rare, so, probably could have seen that coming. Now, speaking of the Level X's, there were a bunch of Level X's in this particular set. We had Absol, which was kind of fun. When you played it, you got to flip 3 coins, and for each head, put a card from the top of your opponent's deck into the lost zone. Kind of fun, saw a bit of play, nothing amazing. Blaziken FB was amazing, we'll get there in a moment. Charizard G Level X, you got to move energy around, you got to do 150 damage, but it was not a particularly great card. Electivire FB Level X let you search for free energy cards and attach them to Electivire FB. Now your turn did end, but then you were set up, and then you could do 30 damage plus 10 more for each energy attached to all of your Pokemon. Again, it was a fun little rogue deck that saw a little bit of play here and there. Garchomp C Level X will go down as one of the greatest attackers the game has ever seen. That will get a bit of a mention. Rayquaza C Level X. Now, if you thought 150 damage was good, this did 200. Had a really nice Pokeball where if it was damaged but not knocked out, you attached an energy from your discard pile. And it did 200 damage, and you discarded all energy from Rayquaza, unless you had 0 cards in hand, in which case you didn't have to. And this was for a water, psychic, fighting, colourless, super awkward card, but oh my goodness, it was fun. So after FB Level X was another really good one that we'll get to a little bit more in a moment. Now, in terms of theme decks here, as you should expect, as is somewhat customary, we had 2 theme decks here, Ignition and Overflow. Ignition had your Arcanine on the front. It was a fire and grass theme deck. You got yourself a holo version of Arcanine G, which is exclusive to the deck. It was a non-holo in the set normally. And then you got yourself a non-holo rare of Camerupt G and Venusaur. And the Venusaur again was exclusive. This was holofoil only in the set proper. Overflow was your Milotic theme deck. It was a Psychic Water theme deck. You got yourself a Holo Milotic C, which was exclusive. It was a non-holo in the set properly. And then you got yourself non-holo rares of Roserade C and Swampert. And again, the non-holo Swampert was exclusive to the deck. It was a holo only in the set properly. Now, if we look at cards, we cannot start anywhere other than Garchomp C. Garchomp C wasn't just a good card. It wasn't just the best card in this set. It's probably, in terms of attackers, the best card in the entire Diamond and Pearl / Platinum era. And that's not exaggeration. There were other cards you could look at like Uxie, and Claydol, which were clearly better in terms of support Pokemon. But as attackers, I don't think you'll find anything better than Garchomp. It was phenomenal. Now, Garchomp C was pretty much entirely underwhelming. 30 damage for 2 energy, 50 damage for 3, but you did 10 to each of your bench Pokemon. There was just nothing to get excited about. But Garchomp C Level X was ridiculously over-the-top proper job broken. The Pokepower Healing Breath, when you Level X'd into Garchomp C, you removed all damage counters from all of your Pokemon SP. You completely healed all of your Pokemon SP. That's not fair. That's ridiculous. And let's not forget that this existed at a time where Poketurn was a thing. So you could even pick this up and then play the Garchomp C down, and then at some point in the not too distant future, you would Level X again, and then just remove all of the damage counters all over again. It was an absolutely ridiculous card. And that's just the ability. Because you see, we also had the attack Dragon Rush. For 3 colourless energy, you discarded 2 energy from Garchomp, and you did 80 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. But bearing in mind this would, for instance, KO a Claydol, leaving your opponent with, well, not very much that they could do, I think is probably a nice way to put it. Or you could take out pre-evolutions or weaker Pokemon. You could basically just completely ignore all of the Pokemon that your opponent actually wanted you to have to go through. You would just go, you know what? Seems like a lot of work. I'll just go round it. And of course, don't forget, you also had energy gain, so it wasn't really a free energy attack. It was a 2 energy attack. Now, Garchomp C would get really proper job over the top brokenly good when we got double colorless energy back, but that wouldn't happen until 2 sets later in Heart Gold Soul Silver. We would get it back, but we had to wait a couple of sets. But make no mistake about it, Garchomp C Level X was still amazing before that happened. It wasn't a bad card. It was still a very good card. It just wasn't quite as good. It was good, but it wasn't proper job over the top broken. It was when Double Colorless Energy got reprinted that we got to taking over the format levels. Before we got Double Colorless Energy, we had Blaziken FB, one of these lovely Frontier Brain Pokemon. And Blaziken was, well, I mean, it burned very brightly right until Double Colorless Energy came out, at which case it was very hard to justify playing this over Garchomp. Now, for a single energy, you switch to defending Pokemon with one of your opponent's bench and burn them, so drag someone active and burn them. And for 2 energy, 30 damage, 60 if your opponent has any water Pokemon in play. Luring Flame did see a little bit of play. But like so many of these, it was the Level X that was amazing. Any damage done to a burned Pokemon is increased by 40, although it didn't stack. Sounds fun, rarely got used. But for 2 energy, 80 damage. Now, damage done to Blaziken FB next turn was increased by 40, so you essentially had 70 HP, so you would get knocked out a lot. But remember, you had stuff like Luxray, which you could use to drag Pokemon active, which helped quite a lot. And it was just a hyper-fast, hyper-aggressive Pokemon. Really was an awful lot of fun, but completely outclassed by Garchomp when it came out. One cool little interaction we did have with Blaziken FB here was the fact that it got KO'd like all the time. Why was that fun? Because we had the card Cynthia's Feelings. Now, Cynthia's Feelings was an alright card. Shove your hand into your deck, draw 4 cards. But if you had a Pokemon KO'd last turn, you draw 8 cards instead. Yeah, great if you've had a Pokemon KO'd, which if you're playing Blaziken, you probably will have. Now, we talked about how amazing Garchomp was. It was so amazing that we needed some specific counters to it, and one of them was the aforementioned Dragonite FB. Now, Dragonite FB for free energy did 20 damage, but against a Pokemon SP, it did 80 damage instead. This was another one that really needed double colorless energy to shine, but energy gain, double colorless energy, and you would just get a straight KO on a Garchomp because of the whole weak to colorless thing. Now, we did mention previously that we did actually have Ambipom that was another good Garchomp counter. For those of you that weren't playing at the time, you basically picked Ambipom or Dragonite. They were the 2 Garchomp counters. Ambipom for 2 energy got a 1-hit KO on a Garchomp C, but only if they had no energy attached to it. So you would sometimes see Garchomp players try and actually attach free energy rather than using energy gain, so that they could essentially bypass Ambipom G as a counter, which was a reason to play Dragonite, even though Ambipom was most of the time an easier to use counter. Now, while we're talking about Pokemon FB, we might as well mention Staraptor FB, and like we saw before, Staraptor is kind of meh. 1 energy, 10 damage, 20 on a coin flip. Free energy, 30 damage, and your opponent switches to the bench. Nobody really cares. But Staraptor FB Level X, It's not really the attack. Free energy, 40 damage, but you may discard a stadium in play to do 70. It's fine. And for what it's worth, if there was a stadium and you discarded it, it would KO Garchomp. But mostly here, we're going for fast call. Search for a supporter card. Just once during a turn, search for a supporter card. Now, like Garchomp C Level X, you had the awkwardness here of having to get it in the active, level exit, and then get it out the active, because it was rarely an attacker. But when you did, you had this amazing ability, which was absolutely, totally worth it. Now, weirdly enough, as good as Garchomp C Level X was, and let's be clear, it was, and it was the best card in the Diamond and Pearl era, at least in terms of attacker, we also need to talk about just Garchomp. Because you see, there was a regular Garchomp in this set, and this regular Garchomp was awesome. It had an ability, or a Pokebody. If it is active and damaged by an attack, you put an energy from the attacking Pokemon into your opponent's hand, which was nice. For 2 energy, it did 40 damage and reduced energy done to you next turn by 20, which was nice. And for 3 energy, you did 120 minus 20 for each energy attached to the defending Pokemon. Now, weirdly enough, this was another card that really did need double colorless energy, just to speed up. An expert bout here, do an extra 20 damage on all your attacks, get an extra 20 HP, give up an extra prize when KO'd. Really did help to turn it into more of a powerhouse, but it was a very, very cool card. And there was a really nice combo here with the Garchomp Level X, but we'll get to that when we look at decks in a little bit. Now, Honchkrow was another really fun card here that almost ruined my National Championships run when I top cut with Donphan, but not quite. It had the Poké Power Darkness Restore. If Honchkrow is your active Pokemon and your opponent's bench isn't full, you can just put a basic Pokemon from your discard pile onto your opponent's bench. And this was sometimes seen as a bit of a tech in Garchomp decks. Pull something that you can then KO. Or in Luxray decks, same kind of deal. Although you could also potentially trap something active, which was fun. Or it was just a way to fill your opponent's bench so that they couldn't bench a Pokemon that they wanted to bench. Then for free energy, 30 damage plus 10 more for each unevolved Pokemon in play. Yours and your opponent's. Again, the Poké Power here would basically let you do an extra 10 damage, and it wasn't some kind of powerhouse card that saw play everywhere, but it was a really useful tech in a bunch of decks that helped in a bunch of matchups. Now, the last Pokemon SP that we really need to talk about here is Chatot, and I like this. Chatot is Chatot G. It's a Galactic Pokemon. Galactic went all the way through. And you had the Poké Power Disrupting Spray. When you play Chatot from your hand onto your bench, you may look at the top 4 cards of your opponent's deck and put them on top of their deck in any order. And what you would essentially do with Chatot G here is try and chain this. You could use it as a one-off for a little bit of an advantage, don't get me wrong. But you would also try and chain this, so you would do this over and over again, making sure that your opponent did not top deck anything good. It did also have a free attack, Search and Escape, that searched for a trainer card, put it into your hand, and then you shuffled Chatot G into your deck, so you could reuse it later. But a lot of the time it was more efficient to use a real attacker and just use Poké Turn to pick up Chatot. Bearing in mind, if you've got a Garchomp in the active and you're destroying your opponent's bench, sure would be nice to give them a bad top deck. Maybe on the turn you KO, I don't know, their only Claydol in play, as an example. And then weirdly, Relicanth saw quite a lot of play here. For a single energy, you did 30 damage to a Pokemon for each tool and stadium your opponent has in play. This was a really nice basic single energy attacker that punished your opponent for playing too many tools. Bearing in mind, decks like SP decks really liked their energy gain, and Expert Bout became extremely popular when that launched. For 2 energy, 30 damage, and you turned off one of your opponent's attacks next turn. Far more situational and easy to play around, but the potential, 90, 120 bench damage for a single energy on a basic Pokemon, yeah, that was worth having to play around with. In decks that could use the fighting energy, this was really fun. Now, in terms of trainer cards, there was not a huge amount in this set, but the ones we had were very, very good. Cyrus's initiative was a great disruption supporter. You flipped 2 coins, and if either of them is heads, you looked at your opponent's hand, and for each heads, you chose a card from your opponent's hand and put it on the bottom of their deck in any order. Bearing in mind this could be comboed quite nicely with Chatot, for instance, and this did really give rise to some very disruptive decks, making sure that your opponent just could not draw into what they wanted, while they were not also having cards in their hand, and it was fun, not to play against, but to play with. Palmer's Contribution was a fairly meat and potatoes card, but it was kind of fun. When you played it, you shuffled up to 5 in any combination of Pokemon and basic energy from your discard pile into your deck. Yeah, we've got a better version of that nowadays, but at the time, it was quite nice. Now, for those of you that have played recently but not back then, Versus Seeker in Supreme Victors might confuse you. Because when Versus Seeker came around in Phantom Forces, there was a secret rare print in Roaring Skies as well, but we're mostly worried about Phantom Forces one here. You saw this as basically a 4 of in every deck. It was one of the biggest, bestest, most impactful cards in the entire game. When it came out in Supreme Victors, it wasn't. It was a 1 or 2 of in some decks. Like, of the 4 Worlds decks printed in 2010, one of them played Versus Seeker as a 2 of. It was not this phenomenal card that saw huge amounts of play in every deck. It was a fun little card that saw some play, but just to be clear, Versus Seeker in the format when Supreme Victors was out was not like Versus Seeker in the format when Phantom Forces came out, despite the fact they are the exact same card and they do the exact same thing. It's just a nice little example of how cards are very dependent on the format in which they're printed. It was still a good card in Supreme Victors, but it wasn't a potential best card in the entire game. Now, Supreme Victors did give rise to some really, really, truly top-flight decks, but they are going to start looking a little bit repetitive. Really, to start off, we've got Blaziken Luxray. Blaze Ray, as it was often called. And Blaze Ray really did depend on using Blaziken FB Level X and Luxray GL Level X to basically just wail on your opponent. I've told you about Blaziken FB Level X earlier in this video, and the fact of the matter is, this deck was a race. It was really as simple as that. You were not trying to take prizes and deny prizes. You knew you were giving up prizes. You knew you were leaving a 70 HP Pokemon in the active. You were basically going, I am faster than you, I am more consistent than you, and I am just going to smash, and I'm going to win by smashing. And it worked. You had Luxray to drag Pokemon active, but also had decent attacks. 60, 70 damage was fine. And then Blaziken, remember, it's a 2 energy attack, and you had energy gain. And you had Cyrus's Conspiracy to search out the energy gain and the fire energy, plus a Cyrus for next turn. And this did get kind of dumb kind of quickly. It was a phenomenally fast card. And it was just a race. You had the usual tricks here. You had Bronzong G so that you could place energy and then move it around later. You had Lucario GL, which was extremely important for making sure that your opponent had ×2 weakness, because otherwise they wouldn't, and in some matchups you really relied on that. And one card we haven't mentioned yet, so we might as well chuck it in here, Toxicroak G. Now, this was a really weird card because it was a promo that was included with a book about Platinum. Now, I wish they did these books for every set. They don't. There's kind of pseudo versions of them in Elite Trainer boxes nowadays, but it's not the same. But it was a card that was only available as a promo when you bought this book. But it was phenomenal because it used Psychic Energy, but it hit a fighting weakness against Luxray. So if any of your Pokemon were KO'd by damage from an opponent's attack, last turn, you did 60 damage plus poison, which was enough to KO Luxray GL Level X. And a lot of these decks would be playing Psychic Energy and wouldn't be playing Fighting Energy. So it gave you a good fighting type Pokemon. Had a nice Poker Power whereby if it was active, you could flip a coin, and if it was heads, you returned it to your hand. 90 HP meant it was rarely relevant, but no, this was cool. Then, of course, don't forget you've got the combination of Crobat G and Poké Turn. Every time you bench Crobat G, you drop a damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon. And I did mention Cynthia's Feelings earlier, which is a very useful card here, given that you are expecting your Pokemon to be KO'd quite a lot. Also worth pointing out that Unknown G was a very, very important card here. It was a Pokemon tool that stopped any effective attacks other than damage happening to your Pokemon, which was really important because of the whole Machamp thing. Machamp just got a straight one-hit KO on all of your basic Pokemon, and this would basically just play basic Pokemon. So, yeah. It was pretty gosh darned important to at least have one copy of Unknown G just to give yourself a chance here. And then, like we mentioned, this gave way to LuxChomp, which is to say Luxray and Garchomp, which did go ahead and win Worlds in 2010, piloted by Yuta Komatsuda. One of the best decks we've ever seen. I published a video earlier this week, the most dominant Pokemon TCG decks ever, and I left it off the list, though it got very close, and a bunch of people have taken issue with that, and I'm fine with it because it really was a phenomenal deck. It had an awful lot of similarities to Blazeray. It was a very similar kind of deck. You still played your Bronzong, you still played Lucario, you probably still played Toxicroak. You played a lot of the same cards. Crobat became very, very important. The big difference, of course, was that you would take out Blaziken and put in Garchomp, and especially when double colorless energy came into the format, it was just absolutely crucial. And if you haven't guessed yet, let me make it explicit. You had to choose Ambipom or Dragonite for this kind of deck, or else you would get run over by opposing Garchomps. Hey, speaking of Garchomps, how about DialgaChomp? This was the other one. But to be clear, DialgaChomp existed with LuxChomp, whereas Blazeray was really replaced by LuxChomp. Now, DialgaChomp here was a very similar kind of thing. You've still got your usual kind of stuff. You've still got Garchomp as a ridiculous attacker. And you've still got a lot of the same tricks you always have with your Bronzong and your Toxicroak, and you still need your Unknown G, you're still playing Crobat. But now you're playing Dialga G Level X. You've got Dialga G using Deafen in the early game, turning off trainer and stadium cards. Remember, at the time, trainer cards were basically items, so it would turn those off. And then you would bring up Dialga G Level X, that turned off Pokebodies, and did 80 damage for 4 energy, flipping a coin until you got tails, and popping an energy in the lost zone for each heads that you flipped. The thing to point out about this was, though, it was a very, very tanky deck. And although you did have Garchomp as an attacker, and you absolutely would use Garchomp as an attacker, Garchomp was not just here as an attacker. Let's be super clear about this. Garchomp was here as much for the ability as anything else. Because, you see, the ability completely healed all of your Pokemon. And you would use Special Metal Energy. And Special Metal Energy said that every attack that you took actually did 10 less damage. So your goal here was essentially to pile 4 of these onto Dialga with your fairly beefy 120 HP, slow your opponent down because they can't use Pokebodies and hopefully you're removing some energy. So they're using smaller attacks, doing less damage, and you're tanking a bit, and you're healing completely. Oh yeah, and in an emergency, you can break the glass and use Poké Turn. It was a fairly redonkulous deck indeed. SP decks really were very, very good. The final one we need to mention here is the other Garchomp. Now, I need to give a shout out to the lovely Jason Klaczynski's blog, where I do go and do a bunch of research. Bulbapedia is also a great website for research, and PTCGRadio.com that does archive a whole bunch of Pokemon decks. And we do need to mention Garchomp here, and I did have a look at this from PTCG Archive. And what we actually see here is a deck built around Supreme Victor's Garchomp. Did actually see a top 8 finish at US Nationals piloted by Mark Garcia. Now, essentially, this was, let's get Garchomp set up as fast as possible, let's grab an expert bout, and let's just go ahead and smash. Like so many decks, you would use the Dust Noir from Diamond and Pearl. It said that if your opponent ever had 4 or more bench Pokemon, you could choose one and shuffle into their deck. So you would shuffle all their best Pokemon back, making it far more difficult for them to, well, mount much of a challenge. You would also then, of course, use Garchomp Level X, which gave you more HP, and it had the Poke Power. When you evolved it up, you could flip 3 coins for each head, put a damage counter on each of your opponent's bench, which was fun. And then for 0 energy, you had Restore. Search your discard pile for any non-Level X Pokemon, put it on your bench as a basic Pokemon, and attach up to 3 energy from your discard pile. So this would essentially get one of your Garchomp rolling very, very quickly indeed. It was a really cool deck. It was a fringe deck. It was the kind of deck that you'd see pop up occasionally, and then every so often somebody like Mark Garcia would have a nuts run at a big tournament. But it was still a fun one, and it wasn't an SP deck, and I needed to mention at least one of those now, didn't I? So there you go, ladies and gentlemen, that was Supreme Victors. A very cool set, a very lovely set thematically for those of you that have gotten to the end of the Platinum video game, and a set that brought us Garchomp C Level X, which I think is fair to say ruled the format until we got rid of it. Nice. But now it's over to you, lovely ladies and gentlemen. Tell me your memories of this set, and if you don't have memories of this set because you weren't playing, tell me what you think about these cards now that you've seen them. Go nuts in the comment section, but be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWasi, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.